Mr. Galloway, thank you very much for accepting this interview. The first question that I have for you is, were you surprised with the outcome of the general election this year, with this our friend Tories losing their majority?
Yes, I was surprised they lost their majority. I wasn't surprised that the result was very much closer than the overwhelming majority of pundits were predicting. I never believed that the Tories would win a landslide, but I certainly didn't imagine that they would lose their majority, and I don't think anyone else in the country really did either.
What do you think that was the role of the social media and digital in these elections or in the politics in general?
Well, it must have been massive, because the wall of sound of bias and discrimination and perversion of the truth was virtually absolute. The newspapers were one thing, but even the BBC played a despicable role, not just in the election, more particularly before the election was called, when at least some semblance of lawfulness had to be introduced into their discourse. But the BBC played a very important role on radio and on television and online in attempting to besmirch the character and reputation of the Labour leader, which is particularly hard to bear because, of course, we're forced to pay for the BBC on pain of imprisonment if we don't, and the very least you can expect is a certain even-handedness, and we didn't get it. So the social media must have played a massive role. Facebook, Twitter, other forms of social media, and just guerrilla word of mouth, especially amongst young people. It became the zeitgeist to vote for Jeremy Corbyn, and thank goodness for that.
And moving forward, how do you think that the social media now will be shaping the future of the politics, the next elections?
Well, you know, by definition, it has to be more and more and more until it is everything, until the last editor of the Daily Mail is strangled by the last copy of the Daily Mail, when we shall truly be free.
Big corporations like Google, Facebook, Twitter, they have the monopoly over the social media, over the what people are reading, interacting in their daily basis. And now they are proposing to be the filter of what we see, what we like, what we dislike. Do you think that the internet is in danger? Do you think that the big corporations should be in charge of controlling what we see, or you think it's a good thing that they are having this approach?
Well, they have the monopoly, they have a lot of control at this point in time, but they can't, of course, forever. And new and different forms of social media will arise. If Facebook ceased to be of utility to people, people would bring forth a new kind of Facebook. The point is, the internet itself cannot be suppressed, and that's why the balance of power in the world has shifted, I believe, irreversibly.
Change a bit of subject. What do you think that is the reason for the current Russia hysteria, with everyone blaming Russian hackers for everything, every single problem in the world? What do you think that's behind that?
Well, in the case of the United States and the Democratic Party, it's obvious. You have to have a good excuse for losing to Donald J. Trump, the biggest chump, the big palooka, whoever stood for the presidency. So the facts are that you have to look around for someone to blame other than the party itself, other than Hillary Clinton herself. So that's what's behind it in the US, I believe. Over here, there's always been a reservoir of Russophobia in all Western countries. Long before the Cold War, going back to the 1920s, there was a fear of the Russian bear coming over here with snow on its boots, ready to try and make our trains run on time. And so it's a kind of, if you'll forgive the pun, a Pavlovian dog's reaction. I don't pay it very much attention. I don't think most people in the street do either.
Getting on Donald Trump, he came to power promising that he would take care of just home affairs. He would not interfere anymore in foreign affairs on other countries and so on. And now he's taking a completely different approach. He's meddling with Iran, with North Korea, in Syria and so forth. What do you think the changes since he sat in the Oval Office? Do you think that this one can be drained, really?
Well, he's a hostage of the generals around him. He's a hostage of the deep state who are out to get him, and he thinks that the only way to avoid being got is to adopt the mantras and the mode of operation of the deep state. The latest that you didn't mention is Afghanistan. It's Groundhog Day. The Yanks are going back into Afghanistan in numbers as yet unknown, but going back, and I saw a general quoted today, they're going to annihilate the terrorists, as if that was easy to do, as if there was agreement on who the terrorists really are, and as if the generals who were there before him were not trying to annihilate the terrorists. It's the kind of mindset that accompanied the escalation of US intervention in Vietnam, which led to the deaths of millions of people, the chemical despoilation of the country, and a generation of people who absolutely hated United States military power.
Now back here to the UK. Now that we moved a bit on the negotiations between London and Brussels, what do you think that will be the outcome of the Brexit now, considering the current negotiation team, Theresa May more weak, let's say? What do you think that will be, what will be happening in 2019 or forward with the Brexit?
Well, I don't think anyone can answer that because it's not over yet. The forces that are opposed to Britain leaving the European Union are very formidable forces. They are big capital, big finance capital in particular, the City of London, the British industrial capital such as it is nowadays, the deep state, the BBC, Whitehall, most members of Parliament and so on. They're all against Brexit. So these forces have not been defanged, and a lot of their fangs are financial. So I think there's bound to be some break in this logjam. I don't believe these people are going to go over a cliff silently. So they will try and reshape the British political landscape, and Tony Blair will be a significant player in that. He's bringing his own money to the table. He's made £100 million in 8 years from the most dubious of sources and activities, and he'll be playing a role in whatever reshaping takes place. So no one can say, but against them is ranged not just the relatively small majority that voted for Brexit, but the very substantial proportion of people who didn't vote for Brexit, who now accept that it has to happen, and that we best make the best job of it and get on with it. And so you have a classic paradigm of the people, a significant majority of the people, against financial and media power. And no one can say what the outcome of that will be, but it's going to be an epic battle. As for the negotiations, they are being conducted by probably the worst group of negotiators it's possible to imagine being assembled. They make Dad's army look like James Bond. They are hopeless, hapless, completely lost. And as I listened to Boris Johnson with his upper class harumphing on Radio 4 this week, I despaired at the idea that at this moment of national trial and national significance that we should be led by such a crew.
Jeremy Corbyn, he came out of this election as a rebirth phoenix, right? in my opinion, I think that you share this opinion as well. Do you think that he can keep his leadership of the party till the next election? And secondly, sustain the momentum and become the next UK Prime Minister?
Well, I think that, he's not young, Jeremy, he's 68 now, but as long as God spares him and his health is maintained, he'll definitely lead Labour into the next election. And of course, one doesn't know when the next election will be. It's scheduled for 2022, but it's by no means certain that the government will last that long. So I'm pretty sure that Jeremy Corbyn will lead Labour, and Labour is ahead in the polls now, some 42-43% in the opinion polls. They're now being consistently over 40, which is what I think you have to be in Britain if you're going to take state power. I'm very hopeful, very optimistic.
What made you stand in Manchester Wharton?
Well, I stood in the by-election, which was cancelled at the very last minute, and in retrospect, I should have pulled out then. But we would have done very much better in a by-election than we could ever do in a general election when people are voting on national issues. They're voting for Labour or Conservative. So we were crushed by that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.